جيل جديد في الطبقات الوسطى في المشرق العربي ما بعد الحرب العالمية الثانية عانى ويعاني من فقر ويأس أكثر من أسلافه. الأسباب كثيرة ومتشعبة. أزمة الطبقات الوسطى في المشرق العربي من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. شهر أيلول سبتمبر حمل الخريف المبكر إلى الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، فمنذ أحداث 11 من أيلول سبتمبر والعالم زلزل بأحداث وتداعيات غيرت وجه المنطقة، بل وغيرت المفاهيم والمسلمات وحتى الأعراف. 17 من أيلول سبتمبر أيضا حمل خريفا من نوع آخر للولايات المتحدة، وما لبث أن ألقى بظلاله على أوروبا والعالم. مسيرة صغيرة بدأت في وول ستريت، وما فتئت أن تحولت إلى حركة شعبية واسعة في أوروبا وأمريكا. هي حركة احتلوا وول ستريت التي دعت إلى احتلال شارع وول ستريت، أي شارع المال والبورصة في نيويورك، وذلك تأثرا بالحراك العربي الذي أسقط 3 أنظمة حاكمة في الوطن العربي. حركة نبعت من السخط من الطبقات الحاكمة وفسادها حتى السأم من السياسات الاقتصادية الراهنة. وفي 15 من تشرين الأول أكتوبر دعي إلى عولمة المظاهرات لتصبح حدثاً عالمياً يستهدف جميع مدن وبلدان الأرض، ما أدى إلى خروج المظاهرات في أكثر من 1500 مدينة حول العالم، 100 منها في الولايات المتحدة وحدها، وفي 25 دولة تضم بعضاً من أكبر اقتصادات العالم. وهكذا توسعت الحركة لتتحول إلى حركة عالمية. اليزابيث لونغيس باحثة اجتماعية فرنسية مكلفة بالأبحاث في المركز الوطني للأبحاث العلمية في فرنسا، وتشغل منصب مديرة قسم الدراسات المعاصرة في المعهد الفرنسي للشرق الأدنى في بيروت. تسلط الضوء على الخيط الرابط في تحولات مجتمعات وشعوب تبذل جهودا حثيثة في تصديها للاستئثار بمصيرها والسعي إلى استعادة زمام المبادرة، وتشرح لنا عن أزمة الطبقات الوسطى في المشرق العربي وتأثيرها في الشعوب العربية. Dr. Elizabeth Longines, head of the Contemporary Studies at the French Institute for the Near East and a sociologist and researcher, welcome to The Inside. Ma'am, the Arabic version of your book came at a time when the region, the Middle East and North Africa, was boiling with massive protests demanding for change and reform and for toppling the long-standing regimes. How did you view this, and how do you view what is taking place currently?
Well, I think the Arab world is really living something like a turn in its history. It has witnessed very strong social, economic, political changes during the last period. And this turmoil has, of course, many reasons. There are many factors that can explain it, and that have all converged in the same direction. Factors like demographic, social, cultural, economic, of economic sort.
Let us focus a bit on the social factors. As a sociologist,
you know, there is a new generation which is very numerous, but which is also more educated and more open to the world than the previous generation, than their parents. They have studied in a big proportion of them have now more and more studied at universities. They live in town and they can access to a new social media. And at the same time, they are confronted to a very harsh economic crisis, which means that their hopes and their expectations are confronted with this crisis and to the contradiction of unemployment and impoverishment, which is, I mean, far better than what their parents have lived. Their parents have lived the face of development and of enrichment in a way, and they
of a golden age,
of a golden age
to a certain extent,
and they were expecting the same as their parents, and although they are more educated than their parents, they face a more difficult situation, which is of course one cause of
what
social
other
unrest.
factors led to this kind of popular movement at this particular moment in time?
Of course, now this period of history, of world history, is also a period of globalization in different meaning of the term. There is the economic globalization, which gives priority to economic interest, commercial and financial interests. But in front of that, you also have a sort of cultural and social globalization, which means that the youth of the world have access to informations and to images and to values in a way, which
everything
are
became
common,
so much
which
accessible. How do you view all this vis-a-vis the global street? How do you interpret
it? Now, this is an interesting and an important point. Yes, there is something also that we can call a sort of global social movement. You know, at the beginning of the years 2000, we have the world has witnessed this new phenomenon of World Social Forum, which means that social movements have tried to gather and to think of how and to try to find an answer to the new global economic, at the same time as the powerful economic actors, economic and political actors were meeting in Switzerland. They found this idea, they invented this idea of meeting together also in Brazil. But what is striking is that most of the movements that were represented in South America were American, Northern and Southern American, European, and much less from other and from Asian countries. And the Arabic countries were very little represented. The Palestinians started to be represented well. But from other countries, there were
from the Middle East,
from the Middle East and Arab countries, there were small movements.
Yes,
which means, I mean, we can. Well, to what point can we speak of a global street? I'm not sure.
It was not maybe in the favor back then to talk about such kind of movement.
Well,
that's why they didn't send any representatives. They weren't present at such kind of forum.
In 2011, it was of course very striking that we had these movements in New York,
the Occupy
Wall Street, and at the same time this strong movement which started in Spain, not in Northern Europe, in Spain. Well, I'll come back later. This movement in Spain. And then before you had the movement in Greece that was very, very hard. So there is a protest, a social protest in Europe.
And just let me here drive the attention that now, for example, currently, a lot of incidents related to workers and demands have been coinciding in various places across the globe. Another anti-austerity strike in Greece just today. Historic two-day strike paralyzes India, where workers began a two-day strike in India to protest rising prices and government policies to open up the economy. And it is the first time since the independent struggle that India witnesses 2 consecutive days of strikes. At the same time also, here in Lebanon, we also have, the labor union general calling for a general strike. So it seems that it's a kind of boiling situation all over.
Oh yes, surely. There is
maybe
there is a global
it's not
crisis.
Coordinated.
Now the crisis has started also in 2008 and 9, the financial crisis.
The financial crisis.
In Europe, you find that most countries are facing a crisis and an economic crisis, and the governments are pressing on the people and lowering wages and so on. You also now what's the link with India or with this part of the world? One new phenomenon which is really developing, which is not absolutely new, which has started, well, which has developed maybe in the 90s and 2000s mainly, but existed before, is the development of labor migrations. And it's particularly visible in Lebanon. You have more and more foreign workers. And the opening of borders lets people travel much more, travel to get work much more than before. The same phenomenon is visible in Europe. You have Polish workers coming to France or England or Ireland. And this is possible or rendered possible or facilitated because of by the new commercial agreements that open completely the borders, which means that there is more competition between workers, and there is a pressure on wages all over the world. There is also unemployment and so on and so on. So, I mean, there are common phenomena all over the world which explain that you find social movements. Now, there is a coincidence, which is not totally a coincidence, sure, between the movements in the Arab world and the movements in other parts of the world. But they are not of the same nature. They may have the same roots in the end. I mean, this economic, the globalization of economy, which has negative effects on societies all over the world. But there are, of course, specific histories and specific legacies in different countries and in Arab countries, because also of specific historical circumstances. The struggle for democracy against authoritarians or dictatorship is much more important. You had the same struggle in Latin America some 20 years ago, and they have toppled their dictators 20 years ago. This is in a way late in the Arab world, but it had to come.
Better late than never.
Better later than ever, of course. Yes. And maybe in the Arab world, what you can say is that all the issues come together, democratic, social, economic, and that's why it's so difficult for the peoples of the region to find the right way to get out of the crisis. And because also there is this pressure of the global market, on the economies of the national economies.
Yes, we will talk more about globalization and about the issue of the foreign workers and their status here in Lebanon, because you have done an extensive research about this issue, but we have to stop for a short break and then we'll continue to discuss that. The Inside will be back after the break. Stay tuned. الباحثة الاجتماعية الفرنسية اليزابيث لونغيس، التي أمضت أكثر من 3 عقود من الزمن في دراسة المجتمعات في المشرق العربي، هل ترى أن نظاما عالميا جديدا يقولب في منطقتنا جراء هذا الحراك الشعبي؟ وإذا ما كان كذلك، ما هو دور اللاعبين الأساسيين فيه؟ وماذا عن الطبقة الوسطى في هذه المجتمعات؟ هل هناك أزمة حقيقية قد تطيح بها في دول المنطقة؟
Well, the new global order appears through the development of all these international organizations and their increasing role, like the World Trade Organization, which is today maybe the most influent and which has the most the strongest effect and the strongest action on social and economic change, and the World So this World Trade Organization represents the economic interests, meaning the economic actors, the international, multinational firms mainly. Now you also have, of course, the state actors and new organizations, not new organizations, older organizations, who, where they are, they play a role. Like, of course, the United Nations, but also labor, international labor organizations, health organizations, and so on. You now more and more, and this is new, have NGOs, international NGOs, that are really important actors in the global negotiations to defend, to defend the interest of people, but maybe also becoming more and more experts organizations, and there is a danger here that the expertise makes them
brands them.
I mean, cuts them from the people. So you also have, of course,
it separates them to a certain extent.
The people.
So they are not so much representative of the global street.
They may not. No, the NGOs are not supposed to be representative of the state. They are civil society.
The global street. Yes.
And then you have, you traditionally had unions, workers' unions and peasant unions and teachers' unions and so on. They still are and do play a role. What is new is the importance of more spontaneous movements and new type of civil society with local associations, local groups who try to, who are more spontaneous, more representative in a way, but have often not much experience.
Right.
But they are more and more internationalized. That's true. As for social movements, there is a conjunction. Maybe there is not enough coordination.
You are a key sociologist, Dr. Longines, and you studied this region extensively for almost 3 decades of going and coming into Egypt, into Lebanon, into Syria, into Jordan, and you studied the middle class, and you said in your research that there is a middle class crisis in the Orient. First of all, what is the middle class? What is referred to by the word and the term middle class, and to what extent do we have a crisis?
What I, in a way, discovered, at least for myself, is actually the central role of what I call middle classes in social change and social development in Arab countries, and I suppose other countries in other parts of the world have witnessed surely the same type of phenomenon, but it is different from what we have witnessed in Europe, because in Europe and in America, perhaps in different ways of course, there was something like a class struggle which was very clear between workers, because the working class was central to the history of Europe for 1 century, if not more. Here the working class was very small, the peasants were more or less marginalized, and the modern middle class, and I like to call it professional middle class, because there are doctors, lawyers, teachers, engineers. They had the leadership of social movements, even unions and I mean workers and working classes unions and peasants unions were dependent on a middle class leadership. But in the 50s and 60s there were a very small elite, and they had a high status in society. What happened with independence and with social progress and development is that they were transformed in a sort of a very massive but also impoverished bulk or mass, social mass more than class. And we can now speak of middle classes, and they form maybe the biggest part of society, and they have been differentiated because a small part of these middle classes are still an elite, but closer to the state power than the rest of the middle classes. That's why in the subtitle of the French edition of the book, I said déclin des élites and crise des classes moyennes, the decline of elites.
The decline, yes, of the elites.
And crisis of middle class.
Middle class. Now, let's come back here to the region that you just researched. How serious is a middle class crisis in this region?
You asked just before, what is the exact definition of middle classes? Middle classes are difficult to define. It's not only an economic definition it's
a social.
It's also social and cultural. And education plays a big part. And the way people look at themselves is important. People who have higher education, who have been to university, usually consider themselves as middle class. But compared to the previous generation, they don't have the same possibilities. They meet unemployment and poverty. That produces, of course, a subjective crisis and frustration, and it's a ground for radicalism, for social protest, for even violence.
Dr. Elizabeth, you have also been conducting an extensive research into the status of the foreign workers here in Lebanon. What did you come up with?
Well,
what can you tell us about the numbers, for example?
Well, we are still, it's a study which is at its beginning, but I consider it very, very important, because in Lebanon people are very much concerned by emigration, and they much less consider immigration. Whereas one of the astonishing remark that I discovered I did is that now if you look at the population living in Lebanon, the number of foreign residents, the proportion of foreign residents is increasing compared to the Lebanese. And it seems to me that nobody cares. Nobody seems to be aware of that.
Maybe they are not really aware of that.
Yes, that's what I think. Now the numbers, they are difficult to know, of course, because they're not all declared. And
what about the highest nationality?
Now the first important point is that the new immigration, I mean, since 10 years or a little more, it's mainly female. This phenomenon of domestic workers has been well studied. What is less studied is salaried, industrial and service workers. And this is what we are trying to do, to see what is going on with service workers and industrial workers. In this sector, of course, you find Arabs and non-Arabs. The Arabs are mainly Syrians, and the Syrians are mostly not declared. That is why we don't know exactly. And of course, in this specific situation now we have
the refugees.
The refugees, which is another problem. This is one of the manifestations of what I called before the economic globalization, of course. You find now not only Syrians, but you also find Egyptians and Sudanese coming often through Syria, which is important to notice. You also find Indians, Ethiopians, and so the female workers are mainly now Ethiopians. This is the first nationality, Sri Lankan and Filipinos. Now you have a lot, and the male workers are Indians, and more from Bangladesh
and Sudan,
and also Sudan. But and the point is that in companies, you generally find Lebanese, Arabs, and Indians and other nationalities. And what I'm interested in is to see how all these nationalities work together in a way. What is the division of labor? What is the status of each nationality? And of course, in the end, how this increasing recourse or this increasing employment of foreign workers impacts on the situation of Lebanese workers. Now, of course, you have labor laws are for Lebanese but not applied for foreign workers, so it's easier for, and there is less control, of course, it's easier.
Right.
But I just want to say one maybe positive point, maybe, even if it's not considered or not, I mean, not considered like this by many people. I think what is also one of the effects is that all these foreign people, they are part now of the society, and you find new cultural phenomenon, new
blood
cultural
coming into the
encounter,
society. Yes.
encounter, cultural mixture with music, with
habits and norms
well, cultural events, which are quite nice things even for Lebanese.
Yes, this is your opinion as a sociologist, but maybe if it's related to the economy or to other various aspects, it would be a different opinion. Dr. Elizabeth Longines, head of the Contemporary Studies Department at the French Institute of the Near East, and sociologist and researcher, many thanks indeed for this interview with The Inside.
Thanks to you.
You're most welcome. أحبائي شكرا لطيب المتابعة. للمزيد من التواصل theinside@almayadeen.net. إذن theinside@almayadeen.net. من كل فريق العمل ومني زينب الصفار، إلى اللقاء.